I think that we're live. I'm going to wait for the YouTube studio to show up. It's not yet. Ah, alas, it is. So, in this presentation that is called Intuition and Purpose, Discovering Our Flow State, I will be discussing about how we can use the concept of intuition and discover the field where we actually are meant to work in to complete our mission in life that we are here to do. This is kind of aimed towards people who feel lost, who don't really know what are they supposed to do with maybe their degree, or just with their life in general. Maybe they're feeling burnt out, stuck, kind of trying to get ahead in this rat race, but there's always an obstacle and it's just hard. So I'll start off by kind of recapping the three realms of reality. Then I will move into intuition and differentiate between intuition and understanding. And finally, I'll wrap this presentation up with purpose and focus on reaching the flow state where we will do and we will put in effort and time without expecting anything because it's just so enjoyable. Without further ado, let's get into it. Reality. Now, when I think of reality, my first reaction is it's what I see. It is the physical material realm. So I'll kind of go into my drawing board to give more meat to the skeleton, as I say. So let's say here, this is one reality, and this is another reality that is underneath. So the first one, as I mentioned, is the physical realm. So that's kind of what I think of reality. It's my physical body. It is also concepts such as money, belongings, achievements, all that good stuff. However, that's not all that exists. Because then I would think to myself and say, hey, well, I'm also aware of thoughts. I'm also feeling specific things. Maybe I also sense or see different symbols or colors such as auras, chakras, meridians, all that good stuff. So where does that go into? Well, that goes into the realm that is underneath the physical, which is the spiritual realm. As I mentioned, our emotions exist here, our thoughts. For someone, they will see auras, maybe chakras, meridians. And what I wanted to point out is that our intuition also lives in this realm, and so does purpose. So already I want you to notice that I'm putting purpose in the spiritual realm, not in the physical realm. I'll get into it in the end of the presentation, but I just wanted to preemptively specify that when I talk about purpose, I'm really focusing on feeling purpose in life feeling meaning in the work that I do. I'm not focusing on the outcomes because that's all physical stuff, which might happen, meaning you will get benefits physically, but I can't really influence that. So I really want you to think of purpose as a feeling purpose, because we all know, we've heard the saying that why are millionaires or billionaires very miserable people? They have so much stuff, like the physical realm is so great, but spiritually, they kind of feel lost inside. But we'll get into that when I will talk about purpose, which is at the end of the presentation. Now, coming back to the realms of reality. You might notice that, hey, there is still another realm that I have not talked about. Well, this one is called many things, but in my presentation, I will call it unconscious, or soul, to shorten it. Now, what is the unconscious? Well, it is everything and nothing at the same time. It's the foundation of our existence, but I can't give you more detail because it is unknown. It is infinite. It has no form. So we call it the soul, we call it unconscious, we might call it divinity. It has many names, but we just don't really know what it is. So before I move on to intuition, I really wanted to also talk about how these realms interact with each other. I kind of want you to think of a highway of influences where the physical realm influences the spiritual realm, and the spiritual realm influences the physical realm. Because nowadays, I feel that we are so focused on optimizing, on influencing, on putting all of our effort and time in improving our physical realm, we kind of forget about the spiritual realm. For example, processing emotions, figuring out our purpose in life, understanding, using intuition. That kind of gets pushed aside when we just focus on the grind set mindset, which is you wake up, you work, you create savings, you prepare for your retirement, and then eventually when you get to retirement, then you're supposed to finally feel happy, whatever that means. So I want you to notice how targeting the spiritual realm will affect the physical realm as well. So don't worry if you want success, if you want physical success, that allowing yourself to notice your spiritual body, to notice all of these things that are happening inside of you, will create physical success as well. It's not like when you move your attention to your emotions, you will no longer have time, or you will be putting less effort into your physical. It's actually the opposite. The more you put attention into your spiritual realm, the better your physical realm turns out to be. But that's another conversation for a different presentation. Now, let's get into the crux of this presentation, which is intuition. When we hear intuition, we think, it is that gut feeling. It happens sometimes, but most of the times it's just a coincidence or it's random. Well, in this presentation, I really want to change your understanding of intuition, because I'm going to put it out there. Intuition is constantly happening. it is actually what we call intelligence. It is what we call memory. It kind of gets commingled with learning as well and understanding. So let's go to the drawing board to kind of take out the weeds and understand what is really intuition. So let's start with, where does everything come from? As I said, it comes from, or the foundation of everything is unconscious. So unconscious is formless. There is no meaning within conscious. There is no morality, logic, all of that human-like stuff. But somehow, when we tap into unconscious, which we're constantly doing because we're creative unconscious, we have meaning. We have language. We have subjects on the earth, for example, biology, chemistry. So how does this play out? So if we assume that unconscious is the foundation of everything, then what we can kind of hypothesize is that there is this thing called intuition that creates meaning out of nothing. And when it creates meaning out of nothing, it recognizes patterns. And as it recognizes patterns, it creates symbols, it creates form. And then when it has created symbols and form, then it will take the individual insights, so the individual symbols, and connect them together, which is called understanding. Now, the funny thing is that we think that this process of intuition to understanding only happens when we have the gut feeling. I would argue that that is essentially what learning is, what reading, writing, memorizing, kind of just increasing our knowledge is about. Because this really focuses on the idea that information is not something that we get from the outside. It's not external. For example, I read a book and I'm reading all of these lines, and then suddenly I understand. Oh my God, this chapter is about how birds actually also have knees, and it's just the ankle that is a bit bigger than ours, something like that. You think that the information came from the external source, which is the book, the text, the words. But actually, it was already within us. We just used intuition, that is our capacity of recognizing patterns, to create meaning. And then because we were meant to understand this, we created connections, and the concept of, oh, birds also have knees, was born and understood. So let's go in a little bit more deeper into what all this means. So unconscious is, we're not going to really focus on that because it's just it's nothing. It's the formless form of energy. But intuition, as I said, although it is experienced as a gut feeling, as coincidence, it is the capacity of pattern recognition. And here there are three important nuances to this. So, what does pattern recognition actually even mean? Well, number one, it means that we can select. So we can distinguish something from the background so that a form appears. Next thing is that there is this thing called attention. We can shift our attention to what matters. And finally, there is the last point of sequencing, which is ordering experience or ordering things, meaning, into before and after. So this all requires time and space, but we won't go deeper than this for now. So now that intuition is essentially our ability to distinguish form, our ability to focus on what matters at hand, and our ability to order things in a coherent sequence, the last thing that is missing, but which intuition doesn't necessarily mean, is understanding, where the insight, the individual insight that intuition comes up with, so A, B, C, is understood as the alphabet. So there are many things that I'm showing here. But what I really want you to realize is that when we talk about intuition, it's actually remembering knowledge that we already have. So when you go to school and you are learning about math or you're learning about chemistry, you think that you're absorbing information from the presentation, from the teacher. We're like sponges. Well, technically, that's not really what's happening. What we actually are, or maybe better yet, pushing out things from ourselves. It's like if you had a pimple and you had to push it out. You had to push out the gunk. That's kind of what we're doing. When we go to school, we are pushing out the things that already exist. So that's why I want you to realize that intuition doesn't necessarily correlate with understanding. Because we can read stuff or we can listen to a teacher presenting, for example, math. But understanding is a completely different thing. Because if you have to actually manipulate the information, predict, be aware of consequences, and actually come up with alternatives, that is a completely set of things, which I'll go into detail right now. So, as I was talking about, understanding is more manipulating info, so manipulating insights, be aware of the consequences so you can make predictions and come up with alternatives. So I thought that was important to kind of come back and write it out. Now, what are the obstacles to using intuition, and what are the obstacles to understanding? Now, you can kind of say that the first obstacle to using intuition is if you don't have an environment that is fueling the need to pull out this information from you. Going to school, for example. If you wouldn't go to school, technically you wouldn't be able to come up or to talk about all of these different concepts of life. For example, biology, chemistry, arts, psychology, all of the good stuff. But I'm assuming that we all have gone to school. So the first obstacle that many of us are faced with for using intuition is chronic stress. Because this reduces the capacity of our pattern recognition. In some sense, we kind of go into either this survival mode where we have figured out the essential things, but we have stopped any continuous exploration to higher knowledge. Let's illustrate this a little bit better with our drawing board. You're chronically stressed, so you are in survival mode. So for survival mode, you just need to worry about food, shelter, reproduction. That's kind of it. This might give you some correlations to Maslow's pyramid. And when you're in this kind of state, then exploring biology, exploring spiritual teachings is not actually motivated in you because you're in survival mode. You only have three main things to focus on, and that's it. Kind of your mind shuts any other exploration down. The second thing is, I would argue, with old age. When you also are kind of in stress, meaning that your body just starts to degrade, so the cells start to stop functioning, your metabolism also stops functioning, you have many diseases that start to show up, inflammation, and all this stuff. It also, let's say, old age here. It also inhibits our desire to explore, to use intuition, and create more and more and more meaning. So I would argue that when many older people, elderly people, talk about having trouble learning new things, acquiring new things, it just means that their capacity to create meaning is inhibited. I'm also not arguing that physical things don't influence this, but I'm just kind of looking at it from a spiritual aspect. So this is also where you could open up the correlation with past life experiences, how those might also influence your intuition, using your intuition. Maybe in your past life, you had a very traumatic experience with a specific concept. And that kind of, for example, war. And the motivation to create meaning will be inhibited because you have some kind of blockage in your chakras. What I mean by that is that the traumatic experience of war in your past life created a dent in your chakra, kind of blocked it off, and therefore this inhibited using intuition in that scenario to really understand war. I will discuss this in a different presentation so it makes more sense, but just kind of focus on the two explanations above. Now, finally, I want to kind of focus on what are the obstacles to understand, because this was really focusing on using intuition. And if you think to yourself, okay, well, what's the practical use of what I just shared? Keep your physical body in check. That's maybe what I would say, because I think that this really is a point that many people talk about. Intuition is always here. We use it constantly. It's just that the understanding part is what we are more frustrated with. It is those insights that we create that kind of we want to connect and have the light bulb moment. So let's go into what are the obstacles to understanding. Now, the first obstacle to understanding is not something new. Trauma, as I mentioned, also for using our intuition. But this time I wanted to focus on our childhood trauma, on the trauma in our current life, where it will distort the inside connections. What do I mean by that? This kind of will lead to false patterns. We're seeing problems where they don't exist. So, false patterns. What I mean by this is, take the example of somebody who is very narcissistic, or when, for example, I am narcissistic. I think that I know spirituality more than anybody else. So I start off a presentation delving into chakras and kind of going into what is soul, how do chakras work, and expecting that the viewer actually senses chakras in the first place. Now, what happens is that when I'll be doing the presentation, I will kind of feel that I am not explaining it right, that the viewer doesn't understand, and this aha moment won't actually happen. Then what you can tell me is, hey, in this presentation, you really did a bad job because you didn't explain the essential stuff. You went straight into something very specific and you just left the viewers confused. If I have a very traumatic experience in my childhood where being right was something that, I needed to have in order to defend myself, then I will retort to your criticism and say, no, you're just jealous because you're too stupid to understand chakras. I explained it very well. Hopefully, I have tried to show how, as you as an observer, you gave a real criticism, which was, it doesn't mean that you have to become dumber if you talk about the essential stuff. It just means that the other person can't understand what you're talking about because you're going into too much, you're already starting off with too much detail. But because of my past trauma and this analogy where I felt I needed to be right all the time, therefore, I will distort these insights, and what I will understand is that, well, you're jealous of me. And I will continue doing what I'm doing. But that's kind of what I will understand. If somebody will ask me, hey, how did the last presentation go? I'll just say, the viewers, they're very jealous of me, or something like that. Which is, yeah. So that's trauma. Now, the second thing that can be an obstacle to understanding is protecting our identity. I just wanted to mention this because this kind of it's also trauma linked, but it kind of nuances where we will actually distort the insights into something that it is not in order to not threaten our identity. And then the other one is mental habits, which again, all is correlated with trauma. And this is how, when we are on autopilot, we want our environment to remain stable. And so we will, again, avoid insights that threaten that stability. So technically, we can correlate everything to false patterns. So if you would ask me, okay, well, how do I fix these so that I can improve my understanding? Well, you would have to do therapy to resolve your trauma, to resolve these impulses that put you into autopilot and that make you want to protect your identity at all costs. But this presentation isn't about that. This presentation is about purpose. And here finally, purpose comes again, which is that also an obstacle to understanding is when you just are focusing on a field that you're not meant to focus on. I don't actually even think that you saw my drawings. So coming back to purpose, which I'll put the drawing now. It means that there is a destined field that you are meant to focus on in your life. And if you divert from this destined field, then these insights won't connect. Best example that I have is if I think of myself as becoming a mathematician. I personally don't think that that's my purpose. So, however hard I will try to remember math equations, formulas, geometry, trigonometry, algebra, calculus, I probably won't be able to understand the real depths of it and the framework because I'm just not interested and I'm just not talented in that. So, in some sense, it is very important to focus our work on a field that we are talented in. So finally, we have come to the last part of the presentation, which is purpose. Now, what is purpose? In my opinion, purpose is an emotional state where we feel we're making an impact in the world, positive or negative, and where we're learning. So this kind of needs to be nuanced with two concepts: the world and learning. So the world is contributing in some way to society, discovering our role in our community, because we're social creatures. And I do think that one part of purpose or destiny in our life is to discover who are we meant to become in our community. Are we meant to become a teacher? Are we meant to become a painter? Are we meant to become a mathematician? Now, again, the roles in our community can be multiple, so it doesn't necessarily mean that you're stuck with one role. The second concept is learning. So, learning is understanding. It is where we use our sets of talents, interests, conditioning to decrease our inner conflict, our feeling of separation from the environment. Now, the first one is, well, talents, interests, and conditioning. That's kind of what we're destined with. That's what we're born with. The conditioning is the environment that you grew up, the financial success that your family had. Could they afford to put you into a more advanced school or not? Talents, it's something that we're just born with. More, you can think of it more as all of these things that are necessary to perform our mission in life. And the second thing that I mentioned is our inner conflict. What do I mean by decreasing our inner conflict? Well, when we are born, we enter this state of positive versus negative, good versus bad. And so during our life, we will always be with this tension between our good and bad parts, where we'll want to emphasize our good parts and we'll want to hide our bad parts. But the part of life is to, yes, highlight our good parts, but also empathize with our bad parts and kind of not really see them as hindrances. So, by completing our mission in life, by fixing specific problems that we're destined to solve, we enter this flow state where every part of us is important. We're just part of this one big soup. And here we come into the flow state. So many of us want to find this period where time, energy, the physical desires, attachments don't matter. Because in this state, we are so focused on this one thing and on fixing this one imbalance of a problem. But what is actually the flow state? So let's kind of go back to my drawing board. And kind of go into more detail. So I would categorize the flow state with 3 components. Number 1, importance. Number 2, curiosity. And the last is attention. So importance is how important is this idea or is this thing to me? Curiosity is the kind of shift of sustained external motivation to sustained internal motivation, which means that at first it is actually the environment that presents us with an opportunity to delve into a topic. And because it is still part kind of our purpose, we kind of invest into understanding this topic. And then finally, we become aware and cultivate this inner motivation inside of us where we don't have to force ourselves to do something anymore. It just naturally happens. Naturally, I want to really work on this presentation, or naturally, I want to do a really good job with this painting. That's kind of what we're thinking about here. And finally, attention is, well, to stay engaged with the task. Simple as that. So now, if you are telling yourself, okay, well, the flow state, this is really interesting, but how do I discover my flow state? I didn't really understand. I don't know what my purpose is. Well, in the previous video, I kind of talked about how you can maybe figure out the direction to your purpose. But in this video, I want to really focus on, let's just kind of forget about figuring out a bigger mission in life. How about let's just think of targeting a place where we can enter our flow state. So to kind of understand, well, what is important for me, you can ask yourself the question, what do you find yourself thinking about or coming back to during your free time? So any kind of topic or hobby or ideas that isn't necessarily correlated with an external physical reward that come to your mind. For example, in my case, I always come back to thinking, what do trees think? How do trees feel? What do they see? What is life for them? That's what I end up doing in my free time, thinking about trees. Now, to figure out where is your curiosity. So to allow yourself to cultivate that internal motivation in sticking with a task. Ask yourself, what activities or moments make you feel most alive? So if I had to think about that, I would tell myself, when I am maybe using tarot cards, when I'm looking at astrological birth charts, kind of when I have to predict things. That's when I feel the most alive. So that's already where my curiosity is. And now for attention, kind of figure out, where does your attention naturally go? Ask yourself, when do you feel the most connected to your values? If I would answer this, I would say in helping others figure out how to live life the best way that they can, because I am connecting all of these things that I'm interested in, and I'm also healing people, which is a value that I hold dearly. So these might kind of intersect with what purpose requires, which a lot of times purpose isn't just a goal. For example, I want to become an entrepreneur. It is also the sacrifice, so doing things that are painful in the short term, but will bring you rewards in the long term, and being resilient, sticking to this bigger goal at the end of the day. So if you know where your attention naturally moves towards, you'll be able to be more resilient. If you know where your curiosity naturally lies, you'll be able to kind of help with the resilience and justify your sacrifices. Because there always needs to be a justification for giving up the good stuff. And if you understand where importance lies for you, then you'll kind of know, what is that bigger goal that I want to achieve in life? What is that mission? For example, being an entrepreneur. So finally, I want to end with the obstacles to entering our flow state. So if you asked all of these questions and you told yourself, cool, I have figured out that I want to become a teacher. That's my mission in life, for now. And then you think to yourself, but how do I really put this into practice? Because it's not as easy. You are probably lost, or you already have something going on, and pivoting is very challenging and hard. So my first recommendation would be to tap into the spiritual realm more often. What do I mean by that? Switch from being goal-oriented, so materialism-oriented, such as status, money, acquiring things to being more emotionally motivated. I want to feel good. I want to feel fulfillment. I want to feel meaning. So when you are doing something where you do not feel meaning, where you actually feel bored, where you actually feel kind of depressed and disinterested, stop doing that. This is a clear sign that you must pivot. Now, there's going to be another obstacle where it's okay, maybe I kind of do realize that I'm not in the right situation, right environment right now, but pivoting, it's really frightening. It's scary because there's no guarantee of success. So here, I would kind of ask yourself to reflect. Find a quiet space, 15 minutes, and ponder on this question. If I had abundance, if money and time were unlimited, what would I be doing right now? And whatever idea that comes to you, know that this is what you're meant to do, and that the universe will help you move towards that goal because that's your purpose. So the frightening feeling, the need for guarantee is most of the time our own interpretation or our coloring of the situation, where we add stuff to a thing that doesn't really exist. It's kind of what I was talking about with trauma, understanding where trauma interferes with understanding, because maybe in our past we have been so traumatized when we didn't know what was going to happen that now we must know everything all the time. So I would just say maybe therapy is useful for you. If we put aside these 2 points and you still tell yourself, you know what, no, these solutions don't work. I asked the question, I had an idea, or maybe I didn't have an idea. I'm still lost. I still feel lost. Nothing really connects with me. Well, here is my third solution, which is kind of a hack. Use astrology, use divination, numerology to help you. So I would highly advise you to consult with either a numerologist, either an astrologist, or a tarot reader, or even a psychic reader, and have them really look at your life with an observational stance and identify, okay, what are those talents that you have? What are your interests? Oh, I think that I'm sorry, I felt something burning there. So identify what are your talents, what is your what are your interests, what are your skills, and then also identify what are the problems that you have a knack at solving. And finally, what you'll want them to do is when they have figured you out, you'll want them to figure the world out. So identify the pain points that the market has right now, the trends, and help you understand, okay, well, when should I pivot? Which job or role should I be looking to apply to? Or should I just start a startup by myself? And also nuance the periods or the years when it's best to do this. So I guess that's it for today's video. I hope that this helped you a little bit, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.